At 9:02 on a Tuesday morning, the screen of my phone lit up with a text from my father, Dennis. "The rent is overdue. Did you send the money yet?" There was no greeting, no question about how my week was going in San Francisco, just a demand for cash, delivered with the casual expectation of someone placing a takeout order. I did not type a reply. I let the phone sit on my glass desk, the notification glaring under the cool studio lights of my office. Instead of answering him, I dragged my cursor across my second monitor and clicked open a saved folder. Inside was a single screenshot I had captured exactly 1 month prior. It was a picture of my 30-year-old sister Ashley. She was wearing a fresh floral lei, holding a bright pink Mai Tai up to a brilliant Maui sunset. Behind her, my mother and father stood with their arms around each other, tanned and beaming. The caption read, "Island time with my favorite people." 7 months before that photo was posted, I wired $2,000 to my parents' savings account. The memo line on the transfer read, "Summer family trip." We had talked about Hawaii for years. I picked up extra freelance design contracts working late into the night just to make sure we could afford to go together. When I first saw that photo a month ago, a cold weight sank to the bottom of my stomach. I called my mother, Carol, standing in the exact spot I was in now. When she picked up, I asked her why she was in Hawaii without me. Her voice was light, breezy, carrying the faint sound of ocean waves in the background. "We went ahead and booked for last week," she said, pausing to take a sip of something. "It is just family this time. You are always so tied up with your tech projects, Jennifer. We figured you would not want the distraction." She said the words "just family" as if I were a distant neighbor, not the daughter who funded the very sand she was standing on. Before I tell you how I tore down the fake reality they built, welcome to Amanda Told Stories. Take a second to subscribe and let me know your age and what city you are tuning in from in the comments. I am 33 years old and I work as a UX designer. My entire career is built on identifying broken systems, tracking user behavior, and fixing flaws in the architecture. Standing in my office, listening to my father demand his rent subsidy while staring at a vacation I paid for but was excluded from, my perspective shifted. I stopped looking at Dennis, Carol, and Ashley as my blood relatives. I started looking at them as a broken system, a parasitic loop that was draining my resources. I did not shed a single tear. I did not throw my phone across the room. The sting of betrayal crystallized into a sharp, focused calm. I pulled my ergonomic chair close to the desk, adjusted the brightness on my main monitor, and opened my banking portal. The login screen prompted me for my master password. I typed it in, watching the cursor blink on the stark white background. It was time to run a forensic audit on my own life. And the patterns I found buried in those bank statements were far worse than a stolen trip to the beach. The digital clock in the top corner of my secondary monitor shifted to 9:15. I opened a fresh spreadsheet document titling the file Family Ledger. I pulled up 5 years of banking history from 3 different checking and savings accounts. In my line of work, we map out user journeys to find exactly where a customer experiences friction, where they drop off, or where a system fails to deliver on its promise. I decided to map out my own financial journey to see exactly where my resources had been drained. The charges started populating row by row. It was a detailed timeline of manufactured crises. $200 in February for groceries because Dennis claimed his hours at the local hardware store were unexpectedly cut. $300 in April for new tires on my mother's sedan, accompanied by a tearful phone call about how she felt unsafe driving on the wet highway. $150 every single month for a shared family phone plan that I had kept in my name for convenience, a temporary favor that quietly morphed into a permanent obligation. Then there were the larger, more brazen withdrawals. $800 last October for my father's dental work, I remember that specific transfer vividly. I was sitting in the back row of a convention center in Seattle, preparing to present a panel on interface design, when my phone vibrated with a close-up picture of his swollen jaw. He claimed he needed an emergency root canal and lacked the copay. He said the pain was unbearable. I wired the funds without a second thought, proud to be the reliable daughter, the one who could fix things. I highlighted all these rows, applied a sum formula to the bottom cell, and pressed the Enter key. The final number appeared in bold, black font. $31,450. The sheer size of that number sat at the bottom of my screen, like a tombstone marking the death of my savings. Staring at it, the walls of my quiet home office seemed to blur, replaced by a memory of the harsh, flickering fluorescent lights of a car dealership in Sacramento. I was 19 years old. I could still smell the stale pot of burnt coffee in the waiting area and the sharp chemical scent of new floor mats. My parents had brought me there on a Saturday morning under the guise of helping me look for a reliable commuter car for college. Instead, they sat me across from a weary finance manager and handed me a heavy metal pen. Their credit scores had plummeted after a series of poor financial choices they refused to discuss. They needed a co-signer for a mid-size SUV, not a car for me, a vehicle for them. I remember the weight of the pen in my hand. I remember the look of sheer, desperate expectation on my mother's face when I signed my name on that dotted line, binding my unblemished, hard-earned credit history to their financial chaos. My father squeezed my shoulder and called me his lifesaver. They smiled at me with such overwhelming pride. That was the exact day I was conditioned. That was the moment my young brain wired a toxic psychological connection. I learned that my utility was the only currency that bought their affection. If I solved their problems and absorbed their stress, I earned a temporary seat at the family table. My sister Ashley never had to co-sign alone. At 30 years old, she lived in a state of permanent adolescence, heavily subsidized by the very people draining my bank account. Ashley branded herself online as a lifestyle coach. In reality, her career consisted of posting curated morning routines, arranging expensive matcha lattes next to open, leather-bound journals, and filming aesthetic workout routines in matching pastel sets. She produced zero actual income. She had no roster of paying coaching clients, yet she maintained a pristine upper-middle-class aesthetic, frequently posting quotes about manifesting abundance and achieving financial freedom. I was the invisible utility keeping the actual lights on in their household. She was the golden child, paraded around to the extended relatives as the family's success story, simply because her social media grid looked expensive. My eyes drifted back to the spreadsheet, locking onto the line item from 7 months ago. $2,000. The Hawaii Fund. The narrative they spun when I sent that money was that the trip was a reward for all of us, a chance to reconnect after a stressful year. But looking at the cold, hard data, the truth stripped away all my remaining illusions. That $2,000 did not purchase my ticket to a family vacation. It paid for my own exclusion. I had literally financed the joy of the people who chose to leave me behind. I took a deep breath, the air filling my lungs with a strange, unfamiliar lightness. As a UX designer, when I find a fatal error in a program, I do not negotiate with the faulty code. I isolate the bug, and I rewrite the script. I opened a new tab and logged directly into my primary checking account portal. I navigated to the recurring transfers page. There it was, the automatic $800 payment scheduled for the first of every month, labeled Sacramento Rent Subsidy. I hovered my cursor over the trash can icon and clicked delete. A confirmation box popped up on the screen asking if I was sure I wanted to cancel this recurring transaction. I clicked confirm. The line vanished into the digital void. I did not stop there. I moved to my credit card portal. 2 years ago, I had added my mother as an authorized user, explicitly stating it was for medical emergencies only. I found her name under the account management settings, clicked Remove Access, and watched her digital footprint disappear from my ledger. Finally, I opened a new browser window and visited the websites for the 3 major credit bureaus. I placed a hard security freeze on my Social Security number, ensuring no new lines of credit, auto loans, or personal accounts could be opened without a direct phone call to my personal cell device. I closed my laptop. The satisfying click of the aluminum casing echoed in the quiet room. My financial borders were secure. The parasitic drains on my livelihood had been isolated and neutralized. I picked up my oat milk latte, the cup now sweating and cold, and took a long sip. The quiet of my apartment felt different now. It felt safe. I picked up my phone, intending to put it on silent so I could focus on my actual work, but the screen was still glowing with the Instagram application open. I navigated away from the Maui sunset picture and refreshed Ashley's main feed. Her latest post had gone up just an hour ago. It was a mirror selfie taken in a high-end boutique dressing room. She was wearing a neutral beige trench coat, looking effortlessly chic, but my eyes locked onto the accessory draped over her forearm. It was a pristine, structured leather handbag. I recognized the signature gold hardware and the distinct geometric shape. A Celine bag. The retail price for that specific designer model hovered right around $3,000. I scoffed quietly, shaking my head at the screen. I assumed it was a clever counterfeit purchased from a shady website, or perhaps she had just taken a photo with a display item to boost her engagement metrics. I figured my parents were secretly covering staggering hidden credit card debt for her out of pity, bleeding my bank account dry just to keep her looking wealthy on the internet. It was a logical conclusion, based on years of watching them enable her delusions. But as I stared at the unmistakable sheen of the leather in that photograph, I had no idea that the bag was incredibly real. And the truth about how she paid for it was far darker than simple credit card debt. A tense month passed. 30 days of digital silence. In the past 30 days without a crisis from Sacramento was mathematically impossible. Dennis and Carol operated on a cycle of engineered urgency. A broken water heater requiring immediate cash, a sudden medical copay they forgot to budget for, a car repair that could not wait until payday. But now nothing. The phone did not ring. They did not call to explain the Hawaii trip. They did not attempt to apologize for spending my money on their private island getaway. They simply vanished into the background noise of my life. I knew exactly what strategy they were deploying. It was the silent treatment, a classic maneuver they had used since I was a teenager. They assumed I was just sulking over feeling left out. They figured if they gave me enough space to cool off, my inherent need to please them would kick back in, and I would quietly resume my role as the family ATM. They believed my silence was a temporary glitch, not a permanent system update. I used this period of isolation to dive deeper into my work. My firm was in the middle of launching a major interface overhaul for a health tech client in Silicon Valley. I sat in my glass-walled office overlooking the busy San Francisco streets, surrounded by sticky notes and prototype sketches, pouring my energy into optimizing user flows. Naomi, a senior developer who sat in the adjacent workspace, noticed the shift in my focus. One afternoon, she dropped a fresh iced coffee on my desk. "You are on fire this month, Jennifer," she noted, tapping a finger on my screen, where I had just streamlined a complex navigation menu. You usually have your phone glued to your hand by this time of day, dealing with some family drama. I looked at the dark screen of my phone resting face down on the desk. I am redesigning my own back-end system, I replied. Naomi smiled, not asking for details, just offering a supportive nod before walking away. That was the beauty of my chosen family in the city. They respected boundaries without demanding constant explanations. The physical reality of severing the financial cord manifested by the middle of the month. I logged into my checking account on a Friday evening. My paycheck had cleared, and for the first time in 5 years, the balance was not decimated by a manufactured crisis. I did not have to set aside a third of my income for my parents' rent. I stared at the surplus, feeling a strange mixture of profound relief and foreign guilt. That evening, I walked down to a local bakery in my neighborhood and bought an artisan pastry and a premium bag of coffee beans, small indulgences I normally would have talked myself out of to save cash for Sacramento. Eating in my quiet kitchen, I realized how much of my daily joy had been sacrificed on the altar of their comfort. Still, my analytical brain could not let go of the math. How were they surviving without my constant influx of cash? My thoughts drifted back to that pristine Celine handbag Ashley held in her mirror selfie. I knew her husband Tyler worked as a mid-level sales representative for a regional logistics firm. His salary could barely cover their luxury apartment lease, let alone designer accessories, expensive organic groceries, and frequent trips to coastal resorts. My working theory formed late one night while I watched the thick fog roll over the hills from my living room window. I suspected my parents were secretly covering staggering credit card debt for Ashley out of pity. I figured they were bleeding me dry, funneling my hard-earned cash to keep her afloat, desperate to maintain the illusion of her successful lifestyle brand. That theory kept me awake, my mind spinning with the injustice of it all. I believed I was financing Ashley's fake life through my parents' poverty. The reality I would soon uncover was far more sinister. But for those 30 days, the hidden debt theory was the only logic that made sense. As the calendar crept closer to the first of the month, the eerie quiet began to feel heavy. The first of the month was rent day. For 24 consecutive months, I had initiated an $800 transfer to Dennis and Carol on this exact date. It was the subsidy that supposedly kept a roof over their heads. My body remembered the routine, even if my mind had rejected it. On the morning of the 31st, I found my hands shaking slightly as I poured my coffee. The muscle memory of codependency is a difficult virus to eradicate. I kept glancing at my phone, waiting for the inevitable ping. The ping arrived at exactly 9:02 on Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my desk reviewing a wireframe layout when the screen of my phone lit up. The text from my father read, "The rent is overdue. Did you send the money yet?" There was no polite preamble, no inquiry about my health or my career. He did not even bother to use a question mark. It was a blunt, abrasive demand for compliance. I stared at the glowing pixels, feeling the old familiar tug of obligation try to claw its way up my throat. My chest tightened. My mouth went dry. The conditioning of 14 years whispered in my ear, telling me to log into the bank, telling me it was just $800, telling me to keep the peace so I would not have to deal with the fallout. I closed my eyes and took a slow, deep breath. The mental image of my father standing by a hardware store register faded. In its place, the vibrant, oversaturated colors of a Maui sunset bloomed in my mind. I saw Ashley, holding her pink drink, wearing a fresh flower crown. I saw my parents beaming in the background, enjoying a tropical breeze funded by my exhausting late-night freelance shifts. They were smiling, while I was sitting alone in my apartment, eating cold takeout and working overtime to ensure they had a good summer. The guilt evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. I picked up the phone. My fingers did not tremble anymore. I opened the message thread. I did not draft a long, emotional paragraph. I did not ask for an apology or explain how much their actions hurt me. Applying my UX mindset, I provided a direct, unambiguous error message. I typed my response with icy precision. I assumed the $2,000 I sent for the family vacation covered it. I am no longer funding the household. Please do not ask again. I read the text twice to ensure there was no room for misinterpretation, no loophole they could exploit. Then I pressed send. The message bubble turned green and delivered. I did not wait to see the typing indicator appear. I swiped down on my screen and tapped the crescent moon icon, enabling Do Not Disturb mode. I placed the phone face down on my desk, shifted my ergonomic chair closer to the monitors, and returned to my digital mock-ups. The interface I was designing needed a smoother transition between pages, and I was determined to solve it before lunch. I sat in the quiet of my office listening to the hum of the air conditioning, fully aware that 2 hours away in Sacramento, a bomb had just detonated. I knew the explosion was coming. The only question was how much collateral damage they were willing to cause. In behavioral psychology, there is a concept known as an extinction burst. When a subject is conditioned to receive a reward for a specific action, and that reward is suddenly removed, the subject does not simply stop the behavior. Instead, they escalate. They push the lever harder, faster, and with increasing desperation, trying to force the broken system to yield the familiar payout. My family had spent 14 years pressing a button that dispensed my hard-earned cash. Now that the machine was unplugged, I knew exactly what to expect. It took exactly 20 minutes for their extinction burst to begin. Sitting in my office, I kept my phone face down on the glass desk, letting the Do Not Disturb function act as a digital shield. I focused on my wireframes, adjusting the pixel grid on a client mock-up, forcing my breathing to remain slow and measured. But I could hear the faint, rhythmic buzzing vibrating against the glass surface, a relentless mechanical heartbeat signaling their mounting panic. When I finally reached out and turned the screen over, the notification center looked like a battlefield. 14 missed calls were stacked in a neat vertical column. 8 calls originated from my mother, 4 came from my father. The final 2 were from Ashley. Denied their instant gratification, they had spent the last hour frantically trying to batter down my boundaries. I tapped the phone icon and navigated to my voicemail inbox. There was a single audio file waiting for me, 3 minutes and 12 seconds long, left by Carol. In the past, seeing a 3-minute voicemail from my mother would have sent my cortisol levels spiking. My chest would have tightened with the urge to call her back immediately and fix whatever disaster she was describing. This time, my pulse remained steady. I treated the recording not as a cry for help, but as a piece of user data. I clicked play on my laptop, routing the audio through my noise-canceling headphones to isolate her exact tone. The green audio waveform spiked immediately with the sound of a sharp, jagged inhale. Carol was deploying her signature weapon-manufactured panic. Her voice trembled with theatrical fragility, the pitch artificially elevated to convey extreme distress. "Jennifer, I do not understand what is happening." She began, her words punctuated by heavy, intentional sighs. "Your father showed me your text. You cannot just cut off the rent on the 1st of the month. We are going to be out on the street. You are trying to make your own parents homeless over a simple misunderstanding about a beach trip." I paused the playback. A simple misunderstanding about a beach trip. That was how she categorized stealing my vacation fund and orchestrating a secret family getaway. She was attempting a masterclass in cognitive dissonance, minimizing her severe betrayal, while simultaneously maximizing her own victimhood. My mother had operated this way for as long as I could remember. Carol was a woman who never held a formal job, yet she carried herself as though she carried the weight of the entire world. Her true occupation was narrative control. Whenever she faced accountability, she transformed herself into a helpless martyr, shifting the focus to her emotional pain rather than her actual behavior. I pressed play again, letting the waveform roll forward. "We thought you were too busy with your tech things, Jennifer. We were trying to be considerate of your schedule. And now you are punishing us. Please pick up the phone. We need that money today, or the landlord is going to file papers." I ended the playback. I did not text her back. I did not call the landlord. Instead, I opened a blank text document. I typed out a meticulous transcription of her entire voicemail, capturing every manipulative phrase and every weaponized sigh. I saved the document, along with the audio file, into a secure digital folder on my desktop. I titled the folder Family Audit. This was my evidence locker. If they wanted to rewrite history, I was going to keep the receipts. No sooner had I saved the file than a new notification dropped down from the top of my screen. It was a text message from my sister. "You are destroying this family because you are jealous of my life. Fix this now." I stared at the pristine white text bubble. Ashley always favored bold, sweeping accusations. She was the golden child, fiercely protective of her unearned status and the resources that funded it. In her mind, my refusal to pay our parents' rent meant less disposable income for them to funnel toward her curated lifestyle. Her text was not born out of concern for our parents' housing situation. It was born out of sheer terror that her own supply line was in jeopardy. She framed my boundary as an act of jealousy. It was a fascinating psychological projection. Ashley spent her days arranging designer coffee cups for internet strangers, pretending to be a successful lifestyle coach while producing zero actual revenue. I spent my days designing software interfaces for Fortune 500 companies. I had nothing to be envious of, but engaging with her delusion would only give her the friction she desired. I took a screenshot of her aggressive demand and dragged the image directly into the family audit folder. Amidst this barrage of predictable manipulation, a third message arrived. This one made me sit up straight. It was from Aunt Diane. Diane was my mother's younger sister, and she was the designated black sheep of the extended family. She was estranged from Carol and Dennis, mostly because Diane possessed a sharp, observant nature and refused to participate in their collective delusions. She lived a quiet life outside of Sacramento, rarely attending family functions, preferring to observe the chaos from a safe distance. We spoke maybe twice a year, usually just exchanging brief holiday wishes. Her text message lacked the frantic energy of the others. It was brief, quiet, and unsettling. "Watch your back with your father, Jen. Things aren't what they seem right now." I read the sentence 4 times. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. Things aren't what they seem right now. It was a cryptic warning that I could not decipher. Did she know about the Hawaii trip? Did she know about the rent demand? Diane never sent dramatic messages, which meant she had concrete information. I drafted a reply asking her what she meant, but before I could send it, my logical brain took over. Asking questions right now would create a digital trail they might intercept. I needed to wait until the dust settled to reach out to her securely. I deleted my drafted reply, took a screenshot of her warning, and secured it in the folder. The silence in my apartment stretched on thick with unresolved tension. Over the next hour, the phone calls gradually ceased. The frantic text messages stopped arriving. The extinction burst had peaked, and the broken system had finally realized that the lever was permanently disabled. Dennis, Carol, and Ashley hit a wall they had never encountered before. My silence. I was not arguing, which meant they had nothing to push back against. I was not defending myself, which meant they could not twist my words. Denied their usual access to my wallet, and stripped of their ability to manipulate my emotions in private, they faced a terrifying reality. They had to pay their own bills. But parasitic entities rarely accept defeat that easily. If private harassment could not break my resolve, they knew they had to change their strategy. They needed to leverage external pressure. They needed to make me the villain in front of an audience, hoping the sting of public shame would force my checkbook open. I closed my laptop and looked out the window at the dense San Francisco fog rolling down the street. The private battle was over. They were about to take the war public, and Ashley was already preparing her stage. Thursday evening brought the inevitable pivot from private extortion to public theater. I was sitting at my kitchen island, reviewing a behavioral heat map for a client application tracking where users hesitated before clicking a button. People are predictable when you study their data long enough. When a user encounters friction, they either abandon the task or look for a workaround. My parents and sister had hit the ultimate friction point. My wallet was sealed shut. Their workaround was to weaponize public opinion. My phone vibrated against the polished quartz countertop. A notification banner slid down from the top edge of the glass display. It was an alert from Instagram, indicating that someone I followed was broadcasting live. The username was Ashley Lifestyle Official. I tapped the alert, entering the broadcast as a silent observer among her 5,000 digital followers. The video feed loaded, revealing Ashley sitting in the driver's seat of a vehicle. She had masterfully curated the aesthetic of a woman on the verge of a breakdown. Her usually flawless contouring was absent, replaced by a pale, washed-out filter that accentuated the dark circles she had intentionally drawn under her eyes. Her hair was pulled into a messy knot, a stark departure from her typical polished waves. She stared into the camera lens, taking a slow, shaky breath. The performance commenced. "Hey, everyone," she began, her voice cracking with practiced vulnerability. "I usually only share positive energy here, but today I need to be honest. I am dealing with a devastating family crisis." I watched the viewer count tick upward. 50, 100, 200. Ashley pressed a manicured finger to the corner of her eye, wiping away a tear that did not exist. "I am experiencing severe financial abuse from a toxic, controlling relative," she told her audience. "This person is using money to manipulate our family, and now they are trying to evict my elderly parents from their home. I am just heartbroken that someone related to me could be so cruel to the people who raised them." She never stated my name explicitly. She did not have to. In the ecosystem of our extended family, everyone knew I was the one who handled the finances. The comment section alongside the video feed transformed into a waterfall of instant sympathy. Strangers typed out strings of praying hands and broken heart emojis. Followers offered words of encouragement, praising her bravery for speaking out against toxic abuse. I sat in my quiet apartment, observing the digital execution of my character. The average person might have felt a surge of panic or the desperate urge to jump into the comments section to defend their reputation. I felt only clinical detachment. My training as a UX designer taught me to look past the surface-level graphics and examine the structural framework beneath. I ignored the fake tears and focused on the environment where the video was filmed. Ashley was broadcasting her plea for poverty from inside a vehicle. The ambient interior lighting cast a soft, expensive glow across her face. Behind her head, I noted the intricate contrast stitching on the ivory leather seats. Above her, a sprawling panoramic glass roof reflected the dimming California sky. The steering wheel, partially visible at the bottom of the frame, bore a distinct luxury emblem. She was sitting inside a brand new top-of-the-line SUV. It was the exact vehicle lease I had co-signed and heavily subsidized until my financial audit earlier that week. The juxtaposition was staggering. She was soliciting pity and painting me as an abusive monster who was starving our parents, all while lounging inside a $60,000 depreciating asset that she could not actually afford. She was broadcasting her victimhood from a leather-wrapped throne built on my stolen wages. Instead of leaving a comment, I pressed the screen record shortcut on my phone. I captured the entire 4-minute broadcast, ensuring the chat replay and viewer metrics were clearly visible. I saved the file to my family audit folder, timestamping it for future reference. I pulled up my canceled banking ledger and placed a screenshot of the ceased car payment right next to her video file. The evidence of her hypocrisy was now cataloged, preserved against any future attempts to delete or deny it. The ripple effects of her broadcast reached my inbox within the hour. Extended family members who had watched the video and absorbed her narrative without a single question began to act as her flying monkeys. My phone buzzed with incoming text messages from aunts, uncles, and cousins who usually only spoke to me at Thanksgiving. Cousin Sarah sent a long paragraph filled with veiled judgments. I saw Ashley's video, Jen. I know you make good money in tech, but family is everything. You cannot put a price on respecting your elders. Uncle Robert texted a single passive-aggressive line. Your grandfather would be deeply disappointed to see you treating your parents this way. Each message was a tactical strike designed to trigger my guilt and force me into submission. They wanted me to panic. They wanted me to write a sweeping public apology and, more importantly, write a check to make the discomfort go away. I did not reply to Sarah. I did not reply to Robert. I maintained absolute radio silence. I took screenshots of every single guilt trip, every misguided piece of advice, and every veiled insult, moving them directly into my digital evidence locker. My refusal to break my silence unnerved my immediate family deeply. They had banked their entire strategy on my fear of embarrassment. In their broken system, social pressure was the ultimate currency. They assumed that once the extended family started whispering, I would cave immediately to protect my reputation. They expected me to call my mother, begging her to make Ashley take the video down, offering to pay whatever they wanted just to stop the public humiliation. By refusing to provide that friction, I broke their machine. A week passed. The video garnered a few thousand views, generating a temporary spike in Ashley's social metrics, but it failed to accomplish its primary goal. My checking account remained closed. The landlord in Sacramento was still demanding the overdue rent. The reality of their financial ruin was creeping closer, and internet sympathy could not be deposited at the bank. The silent treatment is only effective if the target actually cares about the loss of communication. When the target is relieved by the silence, the manipulators begin to suffocate. Dennis, Carol, and Ashley realized that emotional blackmail and public shaming had yielded zero return on investment. They needed a heavier hammer. They needed someone who believed he possessed the authority to intimidate me into compliance. That Thursday afternoon, as I was wrapping up a video conference with a client, a new email arrived in my primary inbox. It was not a text message. It was not a social media tag. It was a formal electronic parcel. The sender name displayed as Tyler Vance, Ashley's husband. Tyler was 32 years old, a mid-level regional sales representative who spent his days in quarter-zip sweaters speaking in hollow corporate buzzwords. He considered himself an elite negotiator because he occasionally closed deals on shipping logistics. He enjoyed the luxury vacations and the pristine aesthetic his wife curated, but he despised the idea of actually paying for them. With the threat of my parents moving into his guest bedroom looming over his head, Tyler decided it was time for the men to handle the situation. I hovered my cursor over the bold subject line. He was about to introduce a severe miscalculation into the equation, and I was ready to document every single word. The notification chime broke the quiet hum of my home office. It was a standard alert from my primary email client, a sharp, clean sound, indicating a new message in my priority inbox. I glanced at the secondary monitor. The sender name displayed as Tyler Vance. The subject line read, "Urgent, regarding Dennis and Carol." Tyler was 32 years old and worked as a regional sales representative for a mid-tier logistics firm based in the Valley. He was the kind of man who communicated entirely in hollow corporate buzzwords, viewing every interaction as a transaction to be won. He wore fleece quarter-zip sweaters, referenced his golf handicap in casual conversation, and considered himself a master negotiator because he occasionally convinced desperate shipping clients to sign unfavorable contracts. He enjoyed the pristine aesthetic his wife curated, but he despised the idea of funding it himself. With my wallet sealed shut, the terrifying prospect of my parents moving into his perfectly decorated guest bedroom had become a tangible threat. Tyler decided it was time for the men to handle the situation. I clicked the subject line. The message body expanded across my high-resolution display, and my eyes immediately caught the bold, colorful company logo anchored at the bottom of the screen beneath his digital signature. He was bypassing personal text messages, opting instead to use his official corporate email account. It was an intentional choice, a calculated power play designed to project authority and intimidate me into submission. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, adjusting my reading glasses, and began to dissect his correspondence, line by line. The email was a masterclass in misplaced entitlement. Tyler abandoned standard family greetings, adopting a stiff, pseudo-legal tone that sounded like he had copied and pasted phrases from a generic cease and desist template he found online. "Jennifer," he wrote, skipping the pleasantries. "It has come to my attention that you have abruptly ceased your expected financial obligations toward Dennis and Carol. Your sudden withdrawal of promised financial support has placed them in a precarious housing situation, constituting a severe breach of your verbal contract." I paused, letting the sheer audacity of that sentence wash over me. A verbal contract. He was attempting to categorize 5 years of emotional extortion and voluntary rescue missions as a legally binding agreement. He continued, building toward his grand finale. "As you know, my firm retains a robust corporate counsel. I have already discussed the parameters of your actions with my buddies in the legal department. If you do not reinstate the rent subsidy by the close of business tomorrow, we will be forced to explore formal action regarding this financial abandonment. It is in everyone's best interest that you resolve this internally before things escalate further." I read the final paragraph 3 times. I did not feel fear. I did not feel the familiar, suffocating panic that usually accompanied my family's demands. I felt a cold, deep wave of secondhand embarrassment. Tyler genuinely thought a grown man utilizing company letterhead to demand his sister-in-law pay his in-laws' rent so he would not have to open his own checkbook was a terrifying premise. He believed he was backing me into a corner. In reality, he had just handed me a loaded gun. In user experience design, when a bad actor attempts to exploit a system vulnerability, you do not argue with them. You deploy a patch that instantly neutralizes their access and logs their activity for security purposes. Tyler was treating my life like a sales negotiation he could bully his way through. He forgot that my job was building secure frameworks. He committed the ultimate unforced error. He used a monitored corporate domain to issue a baseless threat of extortion against a family member. I did not pick up the phone to call him. Hearing his voice would only give him the satisfaction of knowing he provoked a reaction. I kept my hand steady on the keyboard and clicked reply. To ensure my response bypassed any potential filters he might have set up on his work server, I manually added his personal Gmail address to the carbon copy line. I wanted this digital paper trail saved in multiple locations. I maintained a tone that was entirely forensic. I stripped away all emotion, all family history, and all familial titles. I responded to him not as a sister-in-law, but as a compliance auditor, correcting a critical procedural violation. Tyler. I typed the keys, clacking softly in the quiet room. Voluntary gifts are not verbal contracts. There is no legal precedent for mandatory financial support of capable adults. I suggest you consult your robust corporate counsel again, as they will confirm that attempting to enforce a non-existent contract is a waste of billable hours. I hit the enter key twice, creating a clean paragraph break for my closing statement. This was the patch that would seal the breach. Furthermore, using your employer's official communication network and company letterhead to harass and extort a relative is a strict compliance violation. Any further communication regarding this matter from your work domain will be forwarded directly to your Human Resources Department, along with a formal complaint regarding your misuse of corporate resources for personal intimidation. Do not contact me again. I reviewed the text. It was brief, surgical, and devoid of any emotional hooks he could latch onto. I moved my cursor to the send button and clicked. The email vanished from my outbox, rocketing through the servers to land simultaneously on his company desktop and his personal smartphone. I sat in the silence of my apartment and watched the digital clock in the corner of my screen shift from 4:30 to 4:31. I knew exactly how men like Tyler operated. They functioned on bluffing and bravado. They wielded empty threats, assuming the other party lacked the spine to call them on it. When confronted with documented emotionless consequences, bullies inevitably fold. The silence that followed was deafening. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then an hour. No furious reply populated my inbox. No frantic phone calls lit up my screen. My threat of forwarding his extortion attempt to his Human Resources Department was a language he actually understood. It jeopardized his paycheck, his quarterly bonuses, and the very foundation of the lifestyle he was trying so hard to protect. The realization that I held his employment status in my hands paralyzed him. He realized he had stepped onto a battlefield completely unarmed, facing an opponent who kept meticulous records. Tyler was neutralized. He retreated to his luxury apartment, undoubtedly informing Ashley that his brilliant legal strategy had failed. He would never attempt to negotiate with me again. But his failure signaled a critical shift in the ecosystem of my family. Up until this point, Dennis and Carol had relied on proxies. They used the silent treatment to generate guilt. They used Ashley's tearful social media broadcast to generate public shame. They used Tyler's corporate emails to generate legal fear. Every single external strategy had collapsed against the wall of my clinical detachment. The proxies were out of ammunition. The first of the month was approaching rapidly, and the rent was still unpaid. The landlord in Sacramento did not care about internet sympathy or fake verbal contracts. Sitting in my office as the afternoon sun dipped below the San Francisco skyline, casting long shadows across my hardwood floor, I recognized the pattern. When all indirect methods of a system fail to achieve the desired output, the core program is forced to initiate a direct protocol. My parents could no longer hide behind digital screens or weaponize other people. If they wanted my money, they were going to have to look me in the eye to demand it. The digital war was over, which meant the physical confrontation was imminent. I locked my computer, unaware that they were already driving down the highway, bringing the crisis directly to my front door. Thursday evening brought a relentless Pacific storm to the Bay Area, washing the streets of San Francisco in a cold, sweeping rain. The city lights blurred against the wet asphalt, reflecting neon streaks across the pavement. I had just finished a long shift reviewing interface prototypes and decided to walk to the organic market down the block from my apartment complex. I carried a single brown paper bag filled with simple groceries: fresh arugula, a loaf of sourdough bread, a carton of almond milk. It was a mundane, peaceful errand. I enjoyed the chill of the evening air against my face, finding a quiet rhythm in the sound of rain hitting my umbrella. I felt grounded. The digital boundaries I established earlier in the week seemed to hold firm, giving me a false sense of security. I approached the entrance of my building, a modern structure featuring a secured lobby flanked by floor-to-ceiling windows. The warm, amber glow from the interior fixtures poured out onto the wet sidewalk. As I walked under the minimal metal awning to fold my umbrella, my gaze drifted toward the illuminated call box. My footsteps halted. My breath caught in my throat. Two figures stood huddled near the brushed steel intercom panel. They were soaked, shivering in the coastal wind, their shoulders hunched against the elements. I recognized the navy blue trench coat instantly. I knew the rigid, impatient posture of the man standing beside it. It was Dennis and Carol. A sharp spike of adrenaline flooded my veins, followed immediately by a wave of cold dread. My parents lived in Sacramento, a drive that typically took 2 hours on a clear day. In this storm, navigating the congested, slick highways, the journey would have taken closer to 3. They hated driving into the city. My father frequently complained about the traffic, the parking, and the navigation. For them to make this trek on a rainy Thursday night meant the situation had escalated beyond digital extortion. Failing to penetrate my walls via text messages, voicemails, and Tyler's ridiculous corporate threats, they decided a physical ambush was their only remaining tactic. They spotted me before I could pivot and walk back down the block. Carol's eyes widened. Her wet hair clung to her cheeks, and her mascara had smudged beneath her lower lashes, giving her a hollow, haunted appearance. The moment she established eye contact, the performance initiated. It was a masterclass in situational manipulation. A resident from the 4th floor, a young man walking a golden retriever, pushed through the exit doors just as my parents moved toward me. Sensing an audience, my mother amplified her distress. She let out a loud, theatrical sob that echoed over the drumming rain. "Jennifer!" she wailed, her voice echoing in the damp air. "How can you do this to us? We are freezing out here. You are starving your own parents." The neighbor paused, his dog shaking water from its coat. He looked at Carol, then shifted his uncomfortable gaze to me. In the past, this exact scenario would have dictated my surrender. The sheer terror of public embarrassment, the fear of strangers assuming I was a heartless daughter, would have compelled me to rush forward, apologize profusely, and usher them upstairs to appease their demands. My mother knew this. She weaponized the presence of a bystander, betting her entire strategy on my deeply ingrained social conditioning. I did not flinch. I did not rush forward to comfort her. I stood under the awning, holding my grocery bag against my hip, and looked at the neighbor. I offered him a polite, reassuring nod. He blinked, clearly eager to escape the awkward domestic dispute, and hurried his dog down the sidewalk, disappearing into the fog. Deprived of her audience, Carol's sobbing hitched, revealing a flash of genuine frustration. Dennis stepped forward, taking charge of the interaction. He was not crying. His jaw was clenched, his eyes narrowed into tight slits of fury. His windbreaker was dark with moisture, and the water dripped from the brim of his baseball cap. He closed the distance between us, his physical presence imposing and demanding. "Open the door, Jen," he ordered. The tone was not a request. It was a command, issued by a man who believed he held ultimate authority over my actions and my assets. "We are going upstairs to your kitchen, and you are going to write a check for the rent. This nonsense ends tonight." I reached into my coat pocket and retrieved my electronic key fob. I stepped toward the heavy glass partition, keeping my body angled defensively. I swiped the fob across the magnetic reader. A sharp click signaled the unlocking mechanism. I pulled the heavy handle toward me, opening the barrier just wide enough to slip my body through the gap. Dennis anticipated the movement. He lunged forward, thrusting his wet hiking boot into the doorway to block it from shutting. He grabbed the exterior handle, pulling against my weight, intending to force the entrance wide open. The cold metal of the interior handle dug sharply into my palm. My knuckles turned white from the strain. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic, heavy rhythm echoing the 14 years of psychological conditioning I was actively fighting. The little girl inside me, the teenager sitting in the dealership signing away her credit, screamed at me to let go. The ingrained instinct insisted that fixing their problem was the only way to restore safety, but my UX training took over. I looked at the man trying to force his way into my secure environment. He was a security breach, a virus attempting to bypass a firewall. I shifted my stance, planting my boots firmly on the lobby tile, and threw my body weight against the glass panel. The door pinched his boot, halting his progress. I held my ground. I did not invite them into my sanctuary. I maintained a 2-inch crack between the glass and the frame, creating a definitive physical boundary between my peaceful life and their chaotic demands. I looked directly into my father's eyes. My tone emerged remarkably level, stripped of any daughterly affection or residual fear. "You are trespassing," I stated. Dennis blinked, momentarily stunned by the flat, unyielding nature of my voice. "Take your foot out of the door," I continued, enunciating every syllable with crisp precision. "If you do not step back immediately, I am calling building security and they will contact the police to remove you from the premises." His face twisted. The skin around his mouth pulled taut, revealing a flash of primal rage. He was accustomed to compliance. He was used to his anger acting as a universal key that unlocked my resources. Facing a locked door and a threat of law enforcement short-circuited his entire playbook. He shoved against the glass one last time, testing my resolve, but the heavy architectural hinges held firm. Slowly, reluctantly, he withdrew his wet boot from the threshold. I let the heavy door click shut, engaging the magnetic lock. They were outside in the storm. I was inside the warm, illuminated lobby. The physical separation was absolute. I stood on the interior mat, watching the rain streak down the glass between us. Carol pressed her hands against the pane, her theatrical tears abandoned, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. Dennis stared through the transparent barrier. He registered the finality in my posture. He realized that intimidation guilt and public theater had all failed to produce a single dollar. His rage evaporated, replaced by something I had never witnessed in him before. His shoulders slumped, the manufactured authority draining from his frame. The predator realized the prey had outgrown the cage. He leaned close to the glass. Even through the thick pain, I could hear the sudden, stark shift in his vocal register. The anger was gone, leaving behind a hollow, trembling resonance. "Jen, please," he said, his breath fogging the cold surface. "We do not have the money. We are going to be out on the street on Monday." I watched his desperate expression analyzing the data he presented. He claimed they were penniless. He claimed impending homelessness. It was a compelling narrative designed to strike at the core of my empathy. But just as I considered the logistics of his statement, the phone in my coat pocket began to vibrate, signaling an incoming call that would shatter his final illusion. Dennis stood on the other side of the glass, shivering in the coastal storm, playing his final, desperate card: homelessness. It was the ultimate guilt trip, designed to bypass my logic and strike directly at my conscience. His eyes searched mine for a sign of weakness, a microscopic crack in my armor, hoping that 14 years of deep psychological conditioning would finally override my newly established boundaries. The rain hammered against the minimal metal awning above us, creating a deafening rhythm that matched the pounding in my chest. Just as the heavy silence stretched between us, a harsh vibration buzzed against my hip. I reached into my damp coat pocket and retrieved my smartphone. The caller identification displayed the name Aunt Diane. I instantly remembered the cryptic text message she had sent days earlier. "Watch your back with your father. Things aren't what they seem right now." My thumb hovered over the green accept icon. I looked at my parents standing in the cold rain performing their poverty routine, begging for a financial rescue. I tapped the screen and pressed the speakerphone button, turning the volume to its maximum setting. I wedged the toe of my leather boot against the doorframe, opening the heavy glass partition just a fraction of an inch to let the audio pass through the narrow gap. The ambient noise of the storm competed with the digital static of the connection, but Diane spoke with a piercing clarity that cut through the damp air. "Jennifer," she said, her tone urgent and sharp. "Are you there?" "I am here, Diane," I replied, keeping my eyes locked on my father. "Dennis and Carol are standing outside my building right now. They just drove 2 hours through a torrential downpour to tell me they are entirely broke. They claim they will be living on the street by Monday if I do not write a check for their rent. Tell me what your text message meant." The speakerphone amplified a heavy, tired sigh from the other end of the line. Diane was not a woman who engaged in trivial family gossip. She lived a quiet, structured life outside the city limits, observing our toxic family dynamics with a detached sense of pity. When she spoke, her words hit the wet pavement like heavy stones. "They are not facing eviction," Jennifer Diane stated. "They are lying to you." My mother gasped, a sharp intake of breath that fogged the exterior pane of glass. She pressed her wet hands against the transparent barrier, her eyes darting frantically toward the small electronic device in my palm. The theatrical tears she had manufactured only moments ago vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. "What are you talking about?" I asked, keeping my vocal register perfectly even. "Uncle Arthur passed away late last autumn," Diane revealed. The mention of that name sent a ripple of confusion through my mind. Arthur was my father's uncle, a reclusive bachelor who lived modestly in a small desert town near the Nevada border. We rarely saw him during my childhood, always assuming he survived on a meager state pension. He lived far beneath his means, driving a rusted sedan, repairing his own household appliances, and avoiding any display of wealth. Arthur left behind a sizable estate. Diane continued, her voice echoing in the concrete entryway. He named Dennis as the primary beneficiary. 3 months ago, your parents inherited a trust fund containing $45,000. The blood drained from Carol's face in an instant. The ruddy, weather-beaten flush on Dennis's cheeks faded away, leaving a sickly pale complexion. Their carefully constructed narrative of desperate poverty shattered into a million pieces right in front of me. They possessed $45,000 in liquid assets, yet they still chose to drive through a severe coastal storm to extort my paycheck. I processed the raw data. $45,000 was more than enough to cover a full year of their housing utility bills and daily living expenses. But my analytical mind caught a severe discrepancy in the timeline. If they received the trust 3 months ago, I said into the microphone, why did they need my money for the Hawaii trip 7 months ago? Diane offered a dry, humorless chuckle that carried a heavy weight of sadness. "That is the worst part, sweetie. You did not pay for their airline tickets or their beachfront hotel." I stood frozen under the awning, the grocery bag feeling heavy against my hip. "Where did my $2,000 go?" I asked. "The trust was locked in probate," Diane explained, outlining the bureaucratic nightmare of estate law. "Your father needed a specialized attorney to expedite the disbursements. The law firm required an immediate retainer fee to clear the legal hurdles quickly. Dennis and Carol did not have the cash on hand to hire the lawyer. So, they manufactured a fake story about a summer family vacation to get you to cover the legal fees. You funded the lawyer. They unlocked the inheritance, funneled the cash into an undisclosed account to hide it from you, and used a portion of it to take Ashley to Maui while you stayed home. The magnitude of the deception settled over my shoulders like a heavy lead blanket. It was not just a stolen vacation. It was a calculated, premeditated financial crime committed by the very people who were supposed to protect me. I had subsidized the legal theft of my own wealth. In software architecture, this is known as a clandestine backdoor. A trusted user exploits system privileges to siphon valuable data undetected, bypassing all security protocols. My parents utilized my innate trust to clear a financial obstacle, collected a substantial payout, and then continued to extract my monthly rent subsidy just out of sheer greed. They drained my accounts so they could keep their secret windfall intact for my sister. I tapped the red icon on my screen, terminating the call. The device went dark. The sound of the falling rain felt magnified in the sudden suffocating silence that followed. I looked through the 2-inch gap at the individuals who gave me life. Carol was weeping again, but these were not the performative tears of a helpless victim seeking a rescuer. This was the raw, ugly crying of a fraudster caught red-handed. Dennis opened his mouth, stammering, struggling to formulate a defense that simply did not exist. His authoritative posture crumbled, leaving behind a small, pathetic figure standing in a puddle. "Jen, please, let me explain," he pleaded, his voice cracking under the weight of his exposed lies. "We were going to tell you about Arthur. We just needed to get Ashley set up with her lifestyle business first. We were investing in her future. We figured you had a good tech job and did not need the extra cash." I felt a profound clinical detachment washing over my entire body. The lingering anger burned out, leaving only cold, unyielding facts. He justified stealing my savings because he deemed my career successful enough to absorb the loss. He prioritized his golden child's fake internet aesthetic over my actual livelihood. "You used my money to unlock an inheritance," I stated, my words cutting through the storm air with surgical precision. "You hid the funds in a secret account, gave the windfall to Ashley, and still drove to my home tonight to demand I pay your rent." I did not wait for a rebuttal. I did not give them the satisfaction of a screaming match on a public sidewalk. I removed the toe of my boot from the doorframe. I let the heavy architectural partition swing shut. The magnetic lock engaged with a resounding metallic thud, sealing the barrier permanently. I turned my back on them. I did not look over my shoulder as I crossed the brightly lit lobby and pressed the call button for the elevator. My financial tap was permanently sealed, and their hidden reservoir was about to run dry. If my parents had funneled $45,000 into Ashley's illusions, I knew that house of cards was structurally unsound. A trust fund might seem infinite to people who never learned how to budget, but reality has a terrifying way of enforcing its own strict accounting. Ashley was living on borrowed time, and the inevitable consequences of her vanity were about to catch up with her. The heavy glass door of my apartment lobby stood as a permanent barrier separating the reality I built from the delusion my parents inhabited. I returned to my quiet living space on the 4th floor, the sound of the coastal storm fading into a dull, rhythmic hum against my thermal windows. I brewed a cup of chamomile tea, carried it to my office desk, and opened a fresh digital canvas. In user experience architecture, when a critical error causes a system to fail, we perform a post-mortem analysis to trace the exact sequence of the crash. I needed to map the burn rate of $45,000. A trust fund often feels like infinite wealth to individuals who have never maintained a budget. My parents operated under the assumption that a sudden cash injection would alter their fundamental reality, ignoring the simple truth that reckless habits bankrupt any account. I traced the timeline of their windfall. They received the estate payout 3 months prior. My Uncle Arthur lived a modest, frugal existence in the desert, saving diligently for decades, only for his life savings to be liquidated and squandered in 90 days. I deduced the expenditures line by line. $2,000 diverted to the probate attorney utilizing my stolen vacation fund as the initial catalyst. Approximately $10,000 evaporated on the luxury Hawaiian excursion, funding the beachfront suites, the tropical drinks, and the curated photo opportunities. $3,000 hung off Ashley's arm in the form of a pristine Celine handbag. That accounted for roughly $15,000. The remaining $30,000 held the key to their current impending homelessness. I recalled a series of posts Ashley published on her social media feed earlier in the spring. She had debuted a brand new workspace for her lifestyle coaching brand. It was a sprawling, industrial chic loft located in a highly gentrified arts district of Sacramento. The photographs showcased exposed brick walls, expensive fiddle-leaf fig trees in ceramic planters, and a custom neon sign glowing with her cursive signature. Commercial real estate leases in that specific district required rigorous financial vetting. Landlords dealing with unproven tenants boasting zero actual revenue streams mandated severe safeguards. They demanded a full 12 months of rent paid up front to secure the keys. The pieces of the puzzle clicked together with horrifying clarity. Dennis and Carol had taken the remaining $30,000 of my uncle's estate and handed it directly to a commercial landlord. They decided to play venture capitalist for their golden child, funding the physical stage for her fake business, all while continuing to extract $800 a month from my paycheck to cover their own basic survival. They bankrupted themselves to buy Ashley an empty room with a neon sign. Now the trust account held a zero balance. Ashley's lifestyle brand generated no paying clients, rendering the expensive loft entirely useless. My rent subsidy was terminated. The parasitic system lacked an energy source. The structural integrity of their daily lives was fundamentally compromised, and the inevitable collapse was just a matter of time. I did not have to wait long to witness the structural failure. Exactly 4 weeks after the confrontation in the rain, the first major pillar snapped. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was running a diagnostic test on a client's application, staring at lines of clean functional code, when my personal phone emitted a sharp, high-pitched alert. It was a specific tone I assigned to my credit monitoring service. Since my financial audit, I kept a strict digital perimeter around my Social Security number, setting the software to ping me whenever any historical data tied to my profile underwent a status change. I unlocked the screen and opened the security application. A bright crimson notification banner dominated the dashboard. The alert originated from a regional automotive lender. 5 years ago, during the peak of my psychological conditioning, my parents utilized a relentless campaign of guilt to coerce me into acting as a secondary co-signer on Ashley's luxury crossover vehicle. When I finally recognized the toxicity of that arrangement, I spent 6 grueling months battling the dealership, navigating dense legal bureaucracy, and filing endless paperwork to sever my name from that specific loan. I succeeded in removing my financial liability. However, the digital algorithms of the credit bureaus still retained a ghost link between our profiles, sending me automated updates regarding the status of the account. I tapped the crimson banner expanding the details of the alert. The text on the screen read, "Status update. Severe delinquency. Repossession order issued and executed." I sat back in my ergonomic chair, the cool leather squeaking softly in the quiet room. The vehicle was gone. Tyler, despite his arrogant corporate posturing and his mid-level logistics salary, could not cover the exorbitant monthly payments without the hidden subsidy from the trust fund. My parents could no longer bail them out. The mathematics of their lifestyle had finally caught up with the reality of their income. A recovery agent had likely towed the $60,000 depreciating asset right out of their assigned parking space in the middle of the night. Curiosity prompted me to open my internet browser. I navigated to a secondary profile and accessed Ashley's public social media feed. I wanted to see how a lifestyle coach who preached endless manifestation handled a very grounded financial repossession. Her digital facade was visibly fracturing. She had uploaded a new video story just 30 minutes prior to the credit alert hitting my phone. I watched the broadcast in silence. The aesthetic perfection she usually demanded was entirely absent. She was sitting on the hardwood floor of her overpriced commercial studio. The expensive custom neon sign on the exposed brick wall behind her was unplugged, casting a dull gray shadow over the space. The natural light filtering through the industrial windows highlighted the stark emptiness of the room. She held the camera at an awkward angle, her hand shaking slightly, compromising the image stabilization. Her face lacked the usual heavy contouring and bright illumination. Her eyes were puffy, darting around the room as if searching for an invisible script. Sometimes the universe tests your vision by sending toxic energy into your orbit, she told the camera, her voice tight and defensive. I am taking a brief step back from content creation to deal with some intense, unexpected transitions. Certain haters and negative individuals are actively sabotaging my journey, trying to dismantle everything I have built. But real entrepreneurs know that setbacks are just setups for a comeback. She offered a forced, brittle smile before the video abruptly cut off. I studied the frozen frame at the end of the clip. She blamed the universe. She blamed haters. She categorized her own financial illiteracy and the repossession of her car as a targeted sabotage campaign. The cognitive dissonance required to maintain that narrative was staggering. She sat in a $30,000 empty room stripped of her luxury transportation and still refused to acknowledge that her own choices dictated her circumstances. I closed the browser tab. I did not feel a rush of triumph. There was no vindictive joy in watching a relative spiral into consequence. I felt only a profound, heavy validation. For 14 years, I stepped in front of their bad decisions, acting as a human shield against the math. I paid the overdue bills. I covered the spontaneous emergencies. I absorbed the stress so they could continue to live in a comfortable delusion. By stepping aside and sealing my wallet, I did not destroy them. I simply forced them to interact with the natural laws of economics. They were experiencing the authentic American reality of living beyond their means, unprotected by my exhausting labor. The silence in my apartment returned peaceful and uninterrupted. I logged out of the credit portal and shifted my focus back to the clean, predictable code of my client project. The broken system in Sacramento was failing exactly as the data predicted, but I knew the psychology of a cornered predator. Desperation breeds a unique brand of audacity. When an individual loses their status symbols, their transportation, and their safety net all at once, they rarely pause for quiet introspection. They look for a shortcut to restore the illusion. Ashley and Tyler were stripped of their prized possessions, and my parents were facing the expiration of their own apartment lease. The pressure within their household was building to a dangerous threshold. They had exhausted every legal avenue of manipulation. They failed to extort me through guilt, public shaming, and corporate threats. I assumed the repossession would force them to seek genuine employment or downsize their living arrangements. I underestimated the sheer entitlement of the golden child. Denied access to the front door of my finances, they decided to look for a window, setting the stage for a decision that would cross the line from toxic family dynamics into a federal crime. It occurred on a crisp Thursday morning, mere days after the recovery agent towed Ashley's luxury vehicle into the unknown. In the technology sector, Developers classify specific user actions as desperation metrics. When a subject encounters a rigid digital barrier, their subsequent choices often become erratic. They bypass logical frameworks, seeking an instant reward. Tyler and my sister had lost their primary status symbol. The expensive metal shell that shielded them from reality vanished, and the pressure of maintaining their hollow lifestyle pushed them into a catastrophic error. My phone vibrated against the polished oak surface of my desk. It was not a text message or a social media tag. It was a push notification from my primary credit monitoring service, emitting a distinct dual-tone chime reserved solely for critical security events. I unlocked the screen. The banner glowed with a severe warning. Hard inquiry detected. A hard inquiry takes place when a financial institution pulls a comprehensive credit profile to evaluate a new application for debt. I had not applied for a mortgage, a new credit card, or a personal loan. I sat up straight in my ergonomic chair. The ambient noise of the city traffic outside my window faded away as a cold, analytical focus took over my mind. I authenticated my identity through the security application and accessed the detailed report. The inquiry originated from an obscure digital lending platform known for issuing predatory, high-yield personal loans. The requested amount sat at exactly $15,000. The applicant name listed on the electronic form was Jennifer Hunt. However, the contact phone number and the secondary residential address attached to the submission did not belong to my San Francisco apartment. They traced directly back to a luxury loft complex in the valley, Tyler and Ashley's apartment building. The mechanics of the data breach became instantly clear. 14 years ago, when I foolishly signed that automotive paperwork under the fluorescent lights of the dealership, my parents retained physical copies of the documents in their home filing cabinet. That paperwork contained my full legal name, my date of birth, and my 9-digit Social Security number. Stripped of their transportation and desperate for a rapid influx of cash to secure a replacement vehicle, Tyler bypassed all moral boundaries. He visited his in-laws, scraped my sensitive data from those old files, and attempted to impersonate me online to secure a $15,000 payday. When Tyler typed my Social Security number into that digital form, he erased any lingering trace of familial connection. To him, I was not a sister-in-law. I was not a person with a future, a credit score to protect, or a life of my own. I was merely a string of 9 digits standing between him and a quick influx of cash. He calculated the risk and decided my financial ruin was an acceptable price to pay for his comfort. He assumed the digital lending platform would automatically approve the application based on my unblemished credit history, depositing the funds into a routed account before I ever noticed the discrepancy. He treated my legal identity as a convenient extension of the personal teller machine he thought he was entitled to. This was no longer a toxic family dynamic. This was a documented federal crime. I did not feel a sudden rush of panic. My heart rate remained steady and measured. When a network administrator spots a hostile intrusion, they do not scream at the monitor. They isolate the infected node and lock the system down. I moved with surgical precision. I opened 3 separate browser tabs navigating to the official portals of Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. Using my established credentials, I upgraded my temporary security freezes to permanent, impenetrable locks. No financial institution could issue credit under my name without a multi-factor authentication sequence tied directly to my biometric data. The predatory loan application would hit a solid brick wall, resulting in an automatic denial. Simply blocking the transaction was insufficient. A hostile actor had compromised my secure data, and I needed to establish a verifiable paper trail. I picked up my phone and dialed the non-emergency dispatch line for the San Francisco Police Department. The dispatcher answered with a tired, monotone voice. I provided my legal name and stated my intention to file a formal report for identity theft and financial fraud. The officer asked for the specific details of the incident. I supplied the exact timestamp of the inquiry, the name of the lending institution, and the residential address linked to the fraudulent submission. I did not soften the narrative by mentioning the perpetrator was my brother-in-law. I referred to Tyler solely as the suspect. The police officer on the phone asked if I knew the individuals residing at the address tied to the application. I answered in the affirmative. The officer warned me that pursuing the matter could result in severe legal consequences for the suspects, including potential felony charges and federal prosecution. I told the officer I understood the implications perfectly and wished to proceed with the investigation. Translating a familial betrayal into the cold, stark language of the penal code shifted the entire paradigm. The dispatcher typed the information into the municipal database. 30 minutes later, the officer provided me with an official tracking sequence. I typed the 10-digit case number into a fresh text document, saved it as a high-priority file, and dragged it into my family audit folder. The ledger of their transgressions now included a felony. The timing of this criminal act coincided flawlessly with an impending social obligation. That upcoming weekend marked a significant milestone on the extended family calendar. It was the 80th memorial birthday dinner for our late grandfather. The gathering was scheduled to take place in a private banquet room at a traditional steakhouse in downtown Sacramento. Nearly 40 relatives were expected to attend, flying in from various corners of the country to share memories and toast to his legacy. My Aunt Diane called me later that evening, her voice carrying a mixture of exhaustion and sharp concern. She informed me that Dennis and Carol were using the upcoming memorial as a stage to control the narrative. They had spent the entire week calling every aunt, uncle, and cousin on the guest list, spinning a deeply fictionalized tale of our estrangement. They are telling everyone you had some sort of nervous breakdown due to work stress, Diane explained, the disdain evident in her tone. Carol is playing the heartbroken, patient mother. She told Cousin Sarah that you finally realized your mistake, and you are driving up this weekend to publicly apologize and make things right with the family. I stared out my window at the dense coastal fog creeping over the bay. They were laying a psychological trap. They assumed my presence at the memorial dinner would signify my submission. They believed that surrounding me with 40 judgmental relatives would strip away my resolve, forcing me to surrender my wallet to avoid causing a scene in front of the extended bloodline. They were banking on my historical aversion to public conflict. Aunt Diane explained that my mother had spent hours on the phone with Uncle Robert and Cousin Sarah. Carol painted a masterpiece of manipulation. She claimed my demanding career in the tech sector had warped my sense of reality, causing me to lash out at the people who loved me most. She insisted my refusal to pay the rent was a symptom of a larger mental health crisis. By framing my boundary as a psychological breakdown, Carol inoculated the extended family against anything I might say. If I raised my voice, I was unstable. If I defended myself, I was unwell. The only acceptable behavior was quiet submission. They wanted me to beg for forgiveness while they secretly harbored the individual who just tried to steal my social security number. I told Diane I would be attending the dinner. She paused, clearly surprised by my willingness to walk into an ambush, but she did not question my judgment. I spent the next 48 hours preparing for the event. I did not visit a boutique to select a tasteful dress, nor did I purchase a sentimental gift or a floral arrangement for the memorial table. I went to a premium office supply retailer in the financial district. I purchased a sleek black leather presentation portfolio. the kind executives use to pitch multi-million-dollar acquisitions in corporate boardrooms. I bought the leather portfolio because the presentation of data dictates how an audience receives it. If I arrived with crumpled papers stuffed in a purse, I would look chaotic. I would look exactly like the unstable daughter Carol described. But a sleek, structured portfolio carried weight. It communicated authority, precision, and an undeniable grasp on reality. I returned to my apartment and fired up my laser printer. The machine hummed, spitting out crisp, high-resolution physical copies of the digital evidence I had meticulously gathered over the past month. Page 1 was a detailed spreadsheet highlighting the $31,450 I had transferred to Sacramento over 5 years. The columns were neatly aligned, documenting every manufactured crisis and every fake emergency. Page 2 was the scanned receipt Diane had managed to procure, showcasing the $2,000 retainer fee Dennis paid to the probate lawyer, funded directly by my stolen Hawaii vacation money. Page 3 contained the official estate distribution documents, proving the existence of the $45,000 secret inheritance they received, while simultaneously demanding I pay their rent. The final document, placed carefully at the back of the stack, was the fresh police report. The crisp official header of the police department sat starkly above the summary of the identity theft investigation, clearly naming Tyler and Ashley as the primary suspects in the fraudulent loan application. I slid the papers into the transparent sleeves of the leather portfolio, zipping the perimeter shut with a satisfying tactile sound. The binder felt weighty in my hands. It was an arsenal composed entirely of irrefutable facts. For 14 years, my parents used my empathy against me, weaponizing my desire for a peaceful family dynamic to extract my resources. They built a grand, pristine social image on a foundation of my silent labor and drained savings. They invited 40 guests to watch me kneel and beg for a seat at a table I had personally financed. I packed my overnight bag and placed the leather portfolio on the passenger seat of my car. I was ready to drive to Sacramento. I was not going to reconcile. I was not going to argue. I was going to hand them the mathematics of their own destruction, and I was going, specifically, to watch the entire facade burn to the ground. I drove the 2 hours to Sacramento in total silence. I did not turn on the radio. I did not listen to a podcast. I needed the quiet of the car interior to organize my thoughts and finalize the sequential execution of my plan. The drive along the interstate offered a gradual transition from the cool, dense fog of the coast to the flat, sprawling expanse of the Central Valley. The rhythmic hum of the tires against the pavement served as a metronome pacing my breathing and keeping my heart rate steady. I was not walking into a negotiation. I was walking into a system shutdown, and a successful shutdown requires a clear, unclouded mind. As I pulled into the expansive parking lot of the downtown steakhouse, I put the car in park and turned off the ignition. Before gathering my things, I checked the notification center on my phone. A single voicemail waited in my inbox, deposited 3 hours earlier by my mother. I pressed play, routing the audio through the vehicle speakers. Carol sounded elated. Her voice dripped with a sickeningly sweet, patronizing cadence. She had shed the frantic weeping persona from the rainy lobby ambush and replaced it with the magnanimous tone of a victorious matriarch. "We are already at the venue, setting up the floral arrangements," she chirped, the background noise echoing with the clinking of glassware. "We cannot wait to see you tonight, Jennifer. Everyone is just so glad you are finally coming to your senses and apologizing to the family. Drive safe, sweetie." The audio file ended. I sat in the driver's seat, letting the sheer weight of the dramatic irony wash over me. It was almost suffocating. My mother genuinely believed I was returning to submit. She had spent the entire week calling every relative on the guest list, spinning a narrative where I was an overworked, unstable daughter who had temporarily lost her grip on reality. She convinced them, and perhaps even convinced herself, that my arrival tonight was an act of surrender. She thought I was bringing my checkbook to purchase their forgiveness. I picked up the black leather presentation portfolio from the passenger seat. I stepped out of the vehicle and walked toward the grand entrance of the restaurant. The heavy wooden doors swung open, and the physical sensations of the environment hit me instantly. The air inside the establishment was thick with the rich scent of seared prime rib, roasted garlic, and expensive red wine. Dim ambient lighting cast a warm golden hue across the mahogany-paneled walls. The hostess guided me down a long hallway toward a set of double doors marked Private Dining. I pushed the doors open and stepped across the threshold. The room held a long, rectangular banquet table set for 40 guests. Crystal water goblets caught the light, and stiff linen napkins sat folded on pristine china plates. A low murmur of conversation filled the space, but the moment I entered, the acoustic dynamic shifted. 40 faces turned in my direction. The lively chatter faltered, replaced by a tense, heavy hush. I watched the physical reactions ripple down the table. Cousin Sarah leaned close to Uncle Robert, whispering something behind her hand. My aunts exchanged knowing, pitying glances. The smear campaign had been highly effective. To them, I was the villain of the evening. The ungrateful tech worker who abandoned her struggling parents, returning only because the guilt became too heavy to bear. I scanned the room and locked eyes with Carol. She was standing near the head of the table holding a glass of sparkling water. The moment she saw me, her spine stiffened into a rigid, unnatural posture. She offered a tight, patronizing smile, but I could read the micro-expressions underneath. There was a flicker of genuine terror behind her eyes. She expected me to walk through those doors looking defeated. She anticipated a daughter with lowered eyes, hunched shoulders, and a trembling lip. Instead, I stood tall. I wore a tailored charcoal blazer over a crisp white blouse, my hair pulled back into a severe, polished knot. I projected the exact same corporate authority I utilized when presenting software architecture to a boardroom full of skeptical executives. I did not look like a woman on the verge of a breakdown. I looked like an auditor arriving to evaluate a bankrupt firm. I ignored the judgmental stares of my extended relatives and walked calmly down the length of the table. I found my assigned seat card near the center of the arrangement. Aunt Diane sat in the adjacent chair. She did not say a word, but as I pulled out my chair and sat down, she reached under the table and gave my knee a firm, silent squeeze of support. I placed the sleek leather portfolio directly onto the white tablecloth next to my plate. I looked across the centerpiece of white roses and found my sister. Ashley was seated directly opposite me. The pristine, wealthy aesthetic she had cultivated for her internet followers was visibly crumbling. Her posture was defensive, her shoulders rounded, and she glared at me with an intensity born of pure panic. Her hands were positioned in her lap, her knuckles white, as she fiercely clutched the leather Celine handbag. It was a fascinating psychological display. She was holding on to a $3,000 accessory like a life preserver on a sinking ship, desperately trying to project wealth, while her actual life collapsed into ruin. There was a notable empty chair directly beside her. Tyler was missing. His absence spoke volumes, answering a question I did not even need to ask. Earlier in the week, he attempted to steal my legal identity to secure a predatory loan, resulting in a formal police investigation. A man facing potential federal charges for financial fraud, coupled with a severe human resources inquiry at his logistics firm, tends to avoid highly publicized family gatherings. He was likely hiding in their empty commercial loft, paralyzed by the realization that his arrogant corporate threats had summoned a very real, very unforgiving legal storm. His empty chair was a glaring structural flaw in their perfect family portrait. The dinner service commenced. Waitstaff moved efficiently around the perimeter of the room, distributing heavy plates of food and refilling wine glasses. The atmosphere was incredibly strained. The conversation remained superficial, focusing entirely on neutral topics like the unseasonably dry weather and the current standings of local sports teams. Everyone meticulously avoided the elephant in the room. They praised the memory of our late grandfather, a man who built his life on hard work and strict financial discipline, oblivious to the fact that his own son had recently stolen an inheritance to fund a fake lifestyle brand. I ate my meal in quiet, measured bites. I did not engage in the small talk. I let the tension stretch and pull, observing the beads of sweat forming on my father's forehead. Dennis spent the entire dinner shifting uncomfortably in his seat, constantly glancing at the black leather portfolio resting next to my water glass. He knew I brought documents. He just did not know which secrets those pages contained. The plates were eventually cleared away. The waitstaff returned, placing slices of dark chocolate cake and cups of black coffee in front of every guest. The ambient noise in the room settled into a comfortable low hum as people finished their meals and leaned back in their chairs. The transition to the climax arrived. At the head of the table, Dennis adjusted the collar of his dress shirt. He cleared his throat, a rough, gravelly sound that signaled his intention to command the room. He picked up his crystal water glass and reached for a heavy silver dessert spoon. He tapped the metal against the crystal. The sharp, ringing sound cut through the remaining chatter. One by one, the extended relatives turned their attention toward him, their faces settling into expressions of polite expectation. The room fell dead silent. Dennis stood up. He squared his shoulders, preparing to deliver a speech he had likely rehearsed for days. He was about to lay the final bricks of his false narrative, trusting that the social pressure of a formal memorial dinner would trap me in my chair. He assumed I would sit quietly, absorb the public humiliation, and fall back into line. I rested my hand on the zipper of the leather portfolio. The stage was perfectly set. It was time to introduce a fatal error into their code. Dennis stood at the head of the long mahogany banquet table. The soft glow of the overhead chandelier caught the condensation on his crystal water goblet as he reached for a heavy silver dessert spoon. He tapped the metal against the rim of the glass. The sharp, resonant chime cut through the lingering chatter of the dining room. One by one, the 40 extended relatives turned their attention toward him, their faces settling into expressions of polite expectation. My father cleared his throat, a low, gravelly sound designed to command the space. He possessed a distinct talent for manipulating a crowd. During his years managing a regional hardware store, he learned how to project a folksy, relatable charm that successfully masked his deep-seated entitlement. He rested his hands on the edge of the table, bowing his head slightly in a pantomime of profound grief. "We are gathered tonight to honor a great man," Dennis began, his baritone voice echoing off the dark wood-paneled walls. "My father understood the true value of loyalty. He knew that a strong foundation is built on shared sacrifice and mutual support." He paused, allowing the sentimental weight of his opening remark to settle over the diners. The scent of roasted garlic and seared prime rib hung thick in the air, mixing with the heavy tension. I watched Cousin Sarah nod in solemn agreement. Uncle Robert raised his wine glass in a silent, respectful salute. The audience was perfectly primed. The psychological software of their empathy was fully engaged, ready to receive the specific programming Dennis was about to install. But looking around this room, Dennis continued, his tone dropping into a sorrowful, practiced register. "I am reminded of how fragile those bonds have become. The world moves incredibly fast today. It is so easy for the younger generation to get caught up in their own financial success, chasing digital status and corporate titles, while forgetting the very people who sacrificed everything to give them those opportunities. He did not state my name. He did not have to. His gaze drifted slowly down the length of the table, bypassing Aunt Diane, skipping over Ashley, and landing squarely on my face. The implication hit the room with the force of a swinging brick. The private dining area hummed with silent collective judgment directed my way. I sat motionless, observing his performance with clinical detachment. In a different lifetime, under the heavy influence of my previous psychological conditioning, this tactic would have achieved its goal. The crushing weight of 40 disapproving relatives would have forced me to shrink into my chair. I would have felt the burning sting of shame. I would have waited until the dinner concluded, pulled him aside in the hallway, and offered to pay next month's rent, just to relieve the agonizing social discomfort. That was the predictable user loop he expected. He anticipated a seamless transaction where public guilt extracted private funds. I decided to introduce a critical disruption to his workflow. I did not wait for him to finish his hypocritical soliloquy. I pushed my chair back. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the polished hardwood floor, a harsh, grating sound that instantly severed the sentimental atmosphere he had so carefully crafted. I stood up. The banquet hall fell dead silent. The low murmur of background conversation ceased entirely. The clinking of silverware against china halted mid-motion. Every relative turned their head, their expressions shifting from polite mourning to startled confusion. Dennis froze his mouth slightly open, the remaining words of his scripted toast trapped in his throat. His eyes widened, failing to comprehend the deviation from the expected script. I was supposed to remain small. I was supposed to remain quiet and absorb the public shaming. I adjusted the lapels of my tailored charcoal blazer, ensuring my posture remained impeccable. I tapped into the precise, unemotional vocal register I reserved for high-stakes corporate presentations. When dealing with hostile stakeholders, you never raise your volume. You lower your pitch and articulate every single syllable with razor-sharp clarity. Since we are currently discussing the critical importance of family unity and mutual support, I announced my voice, carrying effortlessly to the far corners of the room. I think it is highly relevant to clarify the exact reasons why I am no longer contributing financially to my parents' household. The reaction was instantaneous. Carol practically launched herself out of her upholstered seat. The faux magnanimous persona she had maintained all evening shattered into 1,000 pieces. "Jennifer, this is not the time for your dramatics!" she shrieked, her voice shrill and vibrating with authentic panic. She reached out, gripping the edge of the table as if the floor was tilting beneath her feet. "We are here to honor your grandfather. Sit down immediately and stop trying to ruin this evening." Before Carol could escalate her verbal assault, a sudden movement caught the corner of my eye. Aunt Diane stood up right beside me. Throughout her entire life, Diane had embraced her role as the familial outlier. She never cared about maintaining a flawless social facade. She never bothered playing the intricate games of respectability politics that consumed my parents. Her independence gave her an unassailable authority in moments of crisis. Diane reached out and placed a firm, steady hand on my shoulder. She looked directly at her sister, her expression hardening into a mask of pure steel. "Let her speak," Carol Diane commanded. Her voice was not loud, but it carried a lethal authority that sliced through my mother's hysteria. "You have spent the entire week telling everyone your version of the story on the phone. It is only fair that Jennifer gets the floor to share hers." Carol closed her mouth, her face flushing a deep, mottled crimson. She looked toward Dennis for backup, but my father was paralyzed, his gaze locked in horror on the object resting next to my water goblet. Across the floral centerpiece, Ashley was visibly shrinking. The golden child, usually so eager to claim the center of attention, was actively trying to fold herself into the upholstery. Her manicured fingers dug desperately into the supple leather of her $3,000 handbag. She knew exactly what kind of meticulous record-keeping I was capable of producing. She understood that her lavish lifestyle was built on a foundation of stolen resources, and the architect of that foundation was currently standing at the table holding the blueprints. Her husband's empty chair beside her served as a glaring reminder of the criminal lengths they had traversed to maintain their illusion. Tyler was missing because he feared federal fraud charges, leaving Ashley alone to face the impending detonation. Uncle Robert, seated a few chairs down, lowered his wine glass slowly to the tablecloth. He possessed a stern, traditional worldview, having spent 30 years as a conservative bank manager. He valued fiscal responsibility above all else. My mother had specifically targeted him during her smear campaign, framing my financial withdrawal as a symptom of a mental breakdown. Now, as he observed my calm, calculated demeanor and the structured leather binder resting under my hand, a shadow of doubt crossed his features. The narrative he had been fed was actively conflicting with the visual data presented before him. Cousin Sarah, who had previously sent me text messages dripping with passive-aggressive judgment, looked nervously between my father and me, sensing the shift in power. In user interface design, we utilize a concept known as a destructive action. It is a command that permanently alters or deletes a significant block of data, such as formatting a hard drive or terminating an account. Because the consequences are irreversible, developers build in confirmation dialogues, forcing the user to verify their intent before the system executes the command. Standing in that dim, garlic-scented banquet room, I recognized that I was initiating a destructive action upon my own family hierarchy. Once I opened that folder, the relationships would be permanently formatted. There was no undo button. There was no reverting to a previous save state. I verified my intent. I was ready to execute the command. I reached down and grasped the metal zipper of the black leather portfolio. The mechanical sound of the teeth parting echoed in the quiet room. I did not yell. I did not display a single ounce of anger, sorrow, or vindictiveness. Emotional displays invite debate and manipulation. Facts mandate compliance. I folded the cover of the portfolio back, exposing the crisp, high-resolution documents printed on premium paper. The stark black ink contrasted sharply with the bright white background. I looked around the room, making deliberate eye contact with the relatives who had dared to judge my character without verifying their sources. I held their gaze until they looked away, establishing the parameters of the new dynamic. I was no longer the compliant, invisible utility they could exploit or shame. I was the auditor, and the final accounts were due. For the past 14 years, I began my tone even and measured. I have operated under the assumption that a family functions as a mutual support system. I was conditioned to believe that providing financial stability was my primary duty. I slid the first document out of its protective sleeve. It was the comprehensive spreadsheet detailing half a decade of manufactured emergencies. The room seemed to hold its collective breath. Dennis gripped the edges of the table, his knuckles turning white. Carol looked as though she might faint, her chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow bursts. I held the first piece of evidence up, ready to drop the boulders of truth directly onto their carefully constructed social image. The facade was fracturing, and the impending collapse would leave them with nowhere to hide. I held the primary spreadsheet up to the amber lighting of the chandelier, ensuring the bold black ink was visible to the relatives seated closest to me. I did not raise my pitch. I maintained the measured, steady cadence of a financial auditor delivering a quarterly earnings report to a hostile board of directors. My heartbeat was remarkably calm, the rhythm steady and unhurried. For years, my pulse would race at the mere thought of displeasing these people. Now, protected by the armor of empirical data, I felt entirely untouchable. Over the past 5 years, I stated my voice echoing off the mahogany walls. I transferred $31,450 to Sacramento. This ledger documents every fabricated emergency: the overdue utility bills, the sudden automotive repairs, the urgent dental procedures. I funded the daily survival of this household because I was conditioned to believe it was my fundamental duty. I slid the crisp sheet of paper across the pristine white tablecloth toward Uncle Robert. As a retired bank manager, he understood the undeniable gravity of an itemized ledger. He picked up the document, adjusting his wire-rimmed reading glasses. His eyes scanned the columns, tracing the relentless pattern of extraction. The ambient hum of the restaurant faded away, replaced by the crisp rustle of paper changing hands. 7 months ago, I continued shifting my focus back to Dennis, whose face had drained to a sickly pale hue. I sent $2,000 for a joint family vacation. We discussed Hawaii. Instead, my parents used my money to pay a probate attorney. A ripple of confusion moved through the guests. Aunts leaned forward in their chairs, their brows furrowing. I pulled the second document from the leather sleeve. It was the lawyer's receipt, clearly showing my father's signature and the exact amount I had wired, time-stamped days before their tropical trip. They needed a retainer fee to quickly unlock a secret estate disbursement, I explained, letting the facts hang in the heavy air. Dennis and Carol inherited a $45,000 trust. They hid the windfall, utilized my savings to secure the legal release, and then went to Maui without me. They spent my money to ensure my exclusion. Low murmurs erupted around the banquet table. Aunts and uncles exchanged wide-eyed, bewildered glances. The narrative they had been fed all week, the story of a daughter suffering a mental breakdown, was actively collapsing under the weight of empirical evidence. In user experience design, when you introduce transparent data to a corrupted interface, the hidden bugs are immediately illuminated. I was debugging my family history in real time. I handed the estate distribution paperwork to Aunt Diane, who promptly passed it down the line. The physical rustling of paper became the only sound competing with my voice. Relatives leaned over each other's shoulders, reading the official trust figures. The stark reality of the numbers dismantled the illusion of their poverty faster than any argument ever could. While holding tens of thousands of dollars in hidden liquid assets, I said, my gaze locking onto my mother, they continued to demand I pay their rent. When I finally stopped the subsidies, they drove 2 hours through a coastal storm to ambush me at my apartment building. They stood in the rain and claimed they were facing imminent homelessness. They wept and told me I was starving them. Carol pressed her hands against her cheeks, shaking her head in a frantic, disjointed rhythm. She opened her mouth to speak, to spin a new web of victimhood, but no sound emerged. The performative tears she relied on for decades refused to fall. She was trapped in a spotlight of irrefutable truth. Her eyes darted toward the exit, seeking an escape route that simply did not exist. They were not homeless, I clarified, turning my attention to the opposite side of the table where my sister sat, frozen. They blew the remainder of the inheritance on a commercial lease for Ashley's non-existent lifestyle brand and a $3,000 designer handbag. They bankrupted a secret trust fund to finance a digital illusion, all while trying to extort my paycheck. Cousin Sarah, who had previously sent me text messages urging me to respect my elders, set her wine glass down with a sharp clink. She stared at Ashley, taking in the designer clothes and the pristine aesthetic, her expression morphing from confusion into undisguised disgust. The social capital my parents spent decades cultivating was evaporating before our eyes. The respect they demanded was dissolving into pity and scorn. Dennis finally found his voice, though it lacked any trace of its former authority. "Jennifer," he stammered, raising a trembling hand, "you do not understand the pressure we were under. We were trying to build a secure future." Uncle Robert cut him off without looking up from the spreadsheet. "You stole from your own child, Dennis. There is no future built on that kind of foundation." The blunt assessment from the patriarch of the extended family sealed their social ruin. But the financial exploitation was merely a prologue. The true depth of their moral decay had yet to be revealed. I reached into the back of the leather portfolio and withdrew the final document. The stark municipal header of the San Francisco Police Department sat prominently at the top of the page. "Desperation creates a very predictable behavioral loop," I informed the room, drawing their collective attention back to me. When Ashley's luxury vehicle was repossessed last week, the illusion shattered. Without my hidden subsidies or the drained trust fund, she and Tyler lacked the means to secure a replacement. So they decided to bypass traditional lending requirements. I slid the police report across the center of the table, pushing it directly toward Ashley. She recoiled, pulling her hands back as if the paper was covered in toxic residue. Her knuckles were stark white. Her breathing grew shallow and rapid, her chest heaving under her silk blouse. "Yesterday morning, I announced dropping the final boulder onto the fractured remains of their dignity, Ashley and Tyler. Attempted to use my social security number to take out a $15,000 predatory loan online. They scraped my sensitive data from old automotive paperwork stored in my parents' filing cabinet. They tried to steal my identity to save their lifestyle." The banquet room erupted into a cacophony of stunned gasps. The polite, hushed atmosphere of the steakhouse vanished entirely. Someone dropped a silver fork onto a china plate, the clatter piercing the thick tension. Uncle Robert dropped the ledger onto the table, staring at his brother with a mixture of horror and profound disappointment. The aunts who had judged my absence now covered their mouths in genuine shock. I intercepted the hard credit inquiry and froze my accounts. I stated, my voice slicing through the rising tide of shocked whispers. "I also filed an official report for identity theft and financial fraud. There is now an active federal investigation targeting your golden child and her husband." The payoff was devastatingly logical. There was no screaming on my end. I did not hurl insults, slam my fists on the table, or demand a tearful apology. The true horror for my abusers was not a loud, chaotic argument. It was surgical, undeniable, public exposure. They relied on shadows, whispered half-truths, and closed doors to maintain their control over my resources. By flooding the room with hard data, I stripped away their camouflage and forced them to stand in the harsh light of their own actions. Ashley let out a whimpering, high-pitched sound resembling a cornered animal realizing the trap had snapped shut. She grabbed her leather handbag, pushed her chair back with a frantic screech that scraped against the hardwood, and fled toward the exit doors. She did not pause to defend herself. She did not proclaim her innocence to the room. Her rapid flight served as a glaring, undeniable admission of guilt. The heavy wooden doors swung shut behind her, leaving a profound vacuum in the space she just occupied. I remained seated, watching the aftermath unfold in real time. The relatives who had judged my character just an hour ago now looked at Dennis and Carol as though they were dangerous strangers. The social hierarchy of our bloodline underwent a permanent, irreversible restructuring. My parents sat at the head of the table, surrounded by the silence of 40 people who finally understood the depth of their deception. The facade was gone, leaving nothing but the grim reality of their choices, and they had absolutely no one left to blame. The heavy wooden doors swung shut behind my sister, leaving a profound vacuum in the space she just occupied. The echo of her frantic exit lingered in the private dining room. At the head of the mahogany table, Dennis opened his mouth, desperately trying to salvage whatever fragments of his patriarch persona remained. The color had entirely left his face, leaving his skin a pale ashen gray under the chandelier lighting. "Jennifer," he stammered, raising a trembling hand toward the ceiling. "You have to understand the context. We were not trying to deceive anyone. We were investing in Ashley's future. We wanted to give her a solid foundation for her brand. You already have a successful career, so we thought we could allocate the resources where they were needed most." He attempted to frame his theft as a noble, utilitarian calculation. He wanted the room to believe that redirecting my hard-earned savings and hiding a secret trust fund was simply an act of paternal investment. Uncle Robert, seated midway down the table, did not let the excuse breathe. The retired bank manager placed both of his hands flat on the white linen tablecloth. His jaw was clenched so tightly the muscles fluttered beneath his skin. "Do not dare frame this as an investment," Dennis Roberts said. His voice was quiet, yet it carried a lethal gravity that commanded instant obedience. "You lied to your daughter. You stole from your own child to fund a delusion, and then you sat in this room and tried to convince us she was losing her mind. Your actions are beyond shameful. You have disgraced the memory of the man we are supposed to be honoring tonight." The blunt assessment from his own brother severed the final thread of my father's authority. Dennis slumped into his chair, his shoulders rounding inward, physically shrinking under the intense glare of 40 judgmental relatives. Beside him, Carol initiated her standard defense mechanism. Her lower lip began to quiver. She let out a loud, theatrical sob, burying her face in her hands. For decades, this specific display of manufactured grief functioned as her primary escape hatch. Whenever she faced accountability, she cried, and the surrounding ecosystem rushed to comfort her, prioritizing her emotional comfort over the facts of the situation. She wept, her shoulders heaving, waiting for the inevitable chorus of soothing voices. The voices never came. The aunts and cousins who usually rushed to her side remained firmly planted in their seats. Cousin Sarah looked away, focusing intently on her half-empty wine glass. Another aunt crossed her arms over her chest, her expression hardening into stone. The performative victimhood had lost all its power. Stripped of the false narrative she spent a week building, Carol was just a woman, crying over the exposure of her own greed. The silence in the room was a deafening verdict. I did not feel the need to pile on. The data had spoken, and the jury had rendered a unanimous decision. My task was complete. I reached out and gathered the printed documents, sliding them neatly back into the transparent sleeves of the black leather portfolio. I pulled the zipper along the edge, sealing the evidence locker shut. The tactile sound signaled the official conclusion of my audit. I turned to the woman seated next to me. Aunt Diane sat tall, her posture radiating quiet strength. She had provided the critical intelligence required to debug this broken family system. "Thank you, Diane," I said, keeping my tone warm and sincere. She offered a small, proud smile and patted my forearm. "Drive safe, Jennifer," she replied softly. "You did exactly what needed to be done." I stood up, pushed my chair in, and walked toward the exit. I did not look back at the head of the table. I did not offer a dramatic parting speech. Walking away with quiet dignity was the ultimate confirmation of my independence. I pushed through the double doors and navigated the plush, carpeted hallway of the steakhouse. The ambient noise of the main dining area rushed over me, a stark contrast to the heavy, suffocating silence of the private banquet room. I stepped out through the front entrance, breathing in the crisp, cool night air of downtown Sacramento. The physical relief was immediate. The crushing weight of 14 years of codependency lifted from my shoulders, dissipating into the dark sky. I walked across the expansive asphalt parking lot toward my vehicle. The yellow glow of the streetlights cast long shadows between the parked cars. I unlocked my sedan with the remote fob, the headlights flashing twice in the darkness. As I reached for the door handle, a figure stepped out from behind a large utility van parked in the adjacent space. "Jen, wait. Please, wait." I turned around, tightening my grip on the leather portfolio. The man standing a few feet away bore little resemblance to the arrogant corporate drone who had threatened me through email just weeks ago. It was Tyler. His appearance was jarring. The crisp fleece sweaters and styled hair were gone. He wore a wrinkled button-down shirt, untucked at the waist, and his eyes were bloodshot. His posture lacked the manufactured bravado he usually projected. He looked disheveled, frantic, and cornered. "What do you want, Tyler?" I asked, keeping a safe distance between us. He took a tentative step forward, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "I am ruined, Jen. Everything is gone. You have to call the police and drop the investigation. Please." I studied his erratic movements. He was vibrating with a nervous, frantic energy. "You committed identity fraud," I reminded him, my voice devoid of any sympathy. "You stole my social security number to secure a $15,000 loan. Did you really think I would ignore a felony?" "I was desperate," he pleaded, his voice cracking. Ashley was losing her mind over the repossessed car. The trust fund was empty. We had no options left. "But it gets worse. You have to help us. They fired me." I raised an eyebrow, prompting him to continue. "Human Resources called me into a meeting yesterday morning." He explained, his words tumbling out in a rapid, breathless sequence. "The legal department flagged my inbox. They reviewed the emails I sent you. The ones where I demanded the rent money." I remembered the precise warning I had given him. I told him that using his employer's official communication network to extort a relative was a strict compliance violation. I promised to forward his correspondence to his corporate oversight team if he did not cease his harassment. When he attempted to steal my identity, I followed through on that promise, attaching the police report case number to my email to his Human Resources director. They terminated my contract for gross misconduct and misuse of corporate resources. Tyler confessed, dragging a trembling hand through his unkempt hair. "I lost my salary. I lost my health insurance. Ashley's vehicle is gone, and the landlord is threatening to evict us from the loft because we missed the last payment. We have nothing." He looked at me with wide, pleading eyes, expecting the old version of Jennifer to emerge. He was banking on the sister-in-law who always stepped in to fix the broken pieces. He wanted the utility to dispense a rescue package. "We need a loan, Jen," he begged, crossing the remaining distance until he stood just inches from my car door. "Just enough to secure a cheap used car and keep the apartment until I can find another sales role. You make good money. You will barely even notice it is gone. I swear I will pay you back every single cent." I looked at the man who had threatened me with his robust corporate counsel. The man who viewed my financial ruin as acceptable collateral damage for his luxury lifestyle. He was now standing in a dimly lit parking lot, begging for the scraps he previously tried to steal. The audacity was breathtaking, yet entirely predictable. A parasite does not stop seeking a host simply because it was detached. It merely changes its approach. I did not feel anger. I did not feel pity. I felt a profound sense of closure. I mirrored the exact corporate arrogance he had directed at me weeks ago. I channeled the cold, pseudo-legal tone he used in his official email, delivering his own medicine with surgical precision. "I suggest you contact your buddies in the legal department," I said. Tyler blinked, the realization of his defeat washing over his features. His jaw dropped, but no words came out. The bluff was called. The game was over. And the house always wins when it holds the receipts. I opened my car door, slid into the driver's seat, and closed the door firmly. The engine hummed to life. I did not look at him as I backed out of the parking space. In my rearview mirror, I saw him, standing alone under the yellow glow of the street lamp, a defeated man trapped in a reality of his own making. I navigated the quiet streets of downtown Sacramento, steering my vehicle toward the on-ramp for the interstate highway. The pacing of my life, which had felt like a frantic high-speed chase for the past month, finally began to slow down. The chaotic rhythm of engineered crises and manufactured drama faded away, replaced by the steady, quiet purr of my tires against the asphalt. The heavy fog of my family expectations lifted completely as I merged onto the highway, pointing the headlights back toward San Francisco. I was leaving behind a broken system I spent 14 years trying to debug. I was returning to a life I had built with my own hands, protected by boundaries that would never be breached again. 6 months have passed since the night I walked out of that mahogany-paneled banquet room and left my family sitting in the wreckage of their own deception. In the technology sector, whenever you implement a structural patch to a failing application, you must enter a rigorous observation phase. You monitor the data metrics closely to ensure the isolated bugs no longer drain the system resources. I spent the last half year observing the trajectory of my own life under these newly established operational guidelines. The results were undeniable, proving that the parasitic loop was permanently starved of its host. The psychological withdrawal took time. For the first few months, the first day of the calendar still triggered an automatic spike in my cortisol levels. My body remembered the historical trauma of those manufactured crises. I would wake up anticipating a demanding text message, a frantic phone call, or a theatrical voicemail threatening imminent ruin. Now the first of the month arrives with nothing but the quiet, satisfying ping of my own automated savings transfers hitting my accounts. The silence in my San Francisco apartment is golden, uninterrupted, and profoundly peaceful. The subsequent collapse of my family's artificial reality unfolded exactly as the mathematics predicted, without any intervention required on my part. The consequences they faced were not cinematic. There were no dramatic courtroom convictions or theatrical apologies delivered on a rainy doorstep. Authentic American ruin is far more mundane and unglamorous. It is a slow, grinding descent into the life you can actually afford, stripped of the unearned luxuries you used to demand from others. Dennis and Carol could not maintain their upscale Sacramento rental without my monthly $800 subsidy. The $45,000 trust fund was entirely gone, squandered on a commercial lease and designer accessories to feed my sister's ego. When the landlord issued a formal notice to vacate due to unpaid rent, my parents had no hidden reserves left to deploy. Aunt Diane informed me they were forced to downsize drastically to avoid an official eviction on their permanent record. They packed their belongings and moved into a cramped ground-floor apartment in a heavily industrialized, undesirable zip code. Their new daily reality consists of thin walls, rattling window frames, and the constant dull roar of a nearby freeway. They can no longer host elaborate holiday dinners to impress the extended relatives, primarily because those relatives refuse to answer their phone calls. The social currency they spent decades hoarding evaporated the moment I unzipped that leather portfolio. Ashley experienced a similar poetic descent. Without the financial backing of my parents or the stolen identity funds from Tyler, her curated lifestyle coaching brand dissolved into the digital ether. She could not afford the utilities on her trendy commercial loft, forcing her to abandon the space, along with the expensive custom neon sign she loved so much. Her husband, permanently blacklisted from reputable logistics firms due to his gross misconduct, termination, struggled to secure employment beyond entry-level, unpredictable gig work. The mountain of consumer debt they accrued to maintain their online aesthetic finally reached a critical threshold, and the collection agencies began calling incessantly. Desperation forced my sister out of her carefully filtered internet bubble and into the actual workforce. In a twist of fate that felt almost too precise, Ashley had to accept a retail associate position just to stave off bankruptcy. Aunt Diane sent me a photograph a few weeks ago, taken discreetly from a distance while walking through a high-end shopping district. Ashley is currently working the floor at the exact premium boutique she used to tag in her fake sponsored posts. The girl who built an entire identity around unearned luxury now spends 8 hours a day on her feet wearing a standardized, unflattering black uniform. She folds cashmere sweaters, straightens display racks, and endures the demanding attitudes of wealthy customers who treat her like invisible staff. She must manually arrange the $3,000 Celine handbags she can no longer pretend to own. Her ring lights and beauty filters are gone, replaced by harsh retail fluorescent lighting and the grim reality of a minimum wage paycheck. I feel no vindictive joy looking at that photograph. I just see a system functioning as intended, assigning the correct output to a long history of poor inputs. My mother attempts to establish contact on rare occasions. She does not call, knowing my strict security settings automatically route her number to a blocked folder. Instead, she sends periodic emails. The tone of her messages underwent a radical transformation. The demanding, hysterical matriarch vanished. Her emails are heavily sanitized, brief, and incredibly generic. She sends digital holiday greetings featuring stock photos of autumn leaves or winter snow. She wishes me well, hopes my design career is thriving, and signs off with a polite, distant closing. She never mentions the identity theft, the stolen trust fund, or the confrontation at the memorial dinner. She operates under the delusion that if she ignores the past long enough, I might eventually forget it. I read her emails, but I never issue a reply. Many people believe that healing requires a grand reconciliation. We are conditioned to think we must sit across the table from our abusers, hold their hands, and offer a tearful pardon to truly move forward and find peace. I learned that forgiveness does not require access. You can release the anger you hold towards someone while simultaneously ensuring they never step foot inside your life again. A secure boundary is not a weapon forged in revenge. It is a shield built for survival, ensuring the structural integrity of your own mental health remains uncompromised. Society frequently tells women that being a reliable daughter means setting yourself on fire just to keep your family warm. We are praised for our utility, applauded when we absorb the stress, and shamed the moment we ask for equity. I spent 14 years functioning as a human shock absorber for people who refused to steer away from the potholes. I finally realized that a family that only values your wallet is not a family at all. They are simply bill collectors sharing your genetic code. Next week, I am cashing in the dividends of my newfound freedom. Every single month since I severed the financial ties, I took the $800 I used to send to Sacramento and routed it into a high-yield travel account. Over the past half year, that fund grew steadily, undisturbed by fake dental emergencies or phantom tire replacements. I utilized those savings to book a 2-week solo expedition to Japan. I mapped out an extensive, detailed itinerary. I will wander through the vibrant neon-lit streets of Tokyo, absorbing the chaotic energy of the metropolis. I will ride the bullet train to Kyoto, seeking out quiet, ancient temples surrounded by tranquil bamboo forests. I will eat authentic street food, visit rural hot springs, and navigate a foreign culture entirely on my own terms. I am funding my own joy, using the exact resources my parents once claimed as their birthright. I sit in my bright San Francisco apartment today, reviewing the boarding passes on my phone. The coastal fog is clearing outside my window, revealing a brilliant, unobstructed view of the bay. The architecture of my life is pristine. The user experience is flawless, running smoothly without any hidden background drains. If you're listening to this story from a dark place, wondering how much longer you can carry the weight of someone else's irresponsibility, I need you to hear this truth. You do not owe your livelihood to the people who refuse to build their own. Your labor, your time, and your peace of mind belong exclusively to you. If you are emptying your bank account to pay for a seat at a table where you are not truly welcomed, it is time to push your chair back. Stand up. Walk out the door. Let them pay their own rent. We are raised on a very specific, deeply ingrained cultural mythology in America. From a young age, we are taught that the family table is a sacred sanctuary, a place of unconditional refuge where plates are passed with equity and love is distributed without a ledger. The traditional American family structure is held up as the ultimate ideal, a safety net woven from the unbreakable threads of blood and shared history. But behind the closed doors of modern homes, stripped of the flawless cinematic aesthetic, a vastly different reality often plays out. In absolute, agonizing silence. It is the quiet, invisible tragedy of the reliable child, the one who builds their life correctly, pays their taxes, honors their obligations, and inevitably becomes the structural, load-bearing pillar for a household that refuses to stand on its own 2 feet. Reflecting on the saga of the Hunt family, a narrative of a successful, fiercely intelligent daughter systematically dismantled by her own parents' staggering entitlement, we are forced to confront a deeply uncomfortable truth about parenting values. Dennis and Carol did not fail as parents because they lacked financial resources. They failed because they entirely lacked emotional awareness and fundamental fairness. In their flawed attempt to manage their household, they split their children into 2 distinct, incredibly damaging categories: the golden child and the utility. Ashley, the golden child, was perpetually shielded from the mathematics of the real world. She was given the entirety of a secret $45,000 trust fund and praised for maintaining a hollow, internet-curated illusion of success. Jennifer, on the other hand, was handed a heavy metal pen at 19 years old and pressured to co-sign a high-interest car loan for her parents. This dichotomy represents the total collapse of long-term guidance in parenting. When parents insulate one child from the natural consequences of life while heavily taxing the other for their inherent responsibility, they are not fostering a loving family dynamic. They are cultivating a psychological hostage situation. True family responsibility within American culture is frequently and sometimes intentionally misunderstood. We equate familial loyalty with blind financial subsidy. We are told by society that being a good daughter or a good son means willingly setting yourself on fire just to keep your parents warm. But genuine parenting, the kind that spans decades, builds resilient generations, and honors the traditional family structure, is rooted in radical, unflinching honesty. It requires a mother and father to look at their adult children and demand accountability, even when enforcing those boundaries is painful. Shielding a child like Ashley from a repossessed vehicle, a failed business venture, or the crushing weight of consumer debt is not an act of love. It is an act of developmental sabotage. By hiding a massive inheritance to fund a fake lifestyle brand, all while actively extorting rent money from their responsible daughter, Dennis and Carol violated the most sacred foundational tenet of the family unit trust. A family simply cannot survive when its foundation is built on a clandestine ledger of theft, manipulation, and emotional blackmail. Emotional awareness requires parents to recognize their children as autonomous human beings with their own futures to build, not as financial emergency funds to be raided whenever the consequences of bad decisions come knocking at the door. We hear the echoes of this exact betrayal in living rooms and read them in frantic, guilt-inducing text messages across the country every single day. If you find yourself recognizing the shape of this pain, if the architecture of this familial exploitation looks agonizingly familiar to the reality of your own life, please know that you are not alone in this fight. We explore these complex hidden dynamics regularly, and we invite you to be part of the conversation. Please subscribe and join our community here at Amanda Told Stories. Share your own experiences in the comments below, and let us continue to shine a bright light on the shadows of family dysfunction so others can find their way out. The profound lesson buried in the wreckage of the Hunt family challenges everything we are traditionally conditioned to believe about bloodlines and loyalty. We are instructed by cultural norms, media tropes, and societal maxims that family is forever. This phrase is often weaponized, heavily implying that an individual must maintain an infinite tolerance for emotional and financial abuse simply because they share a genetic code with their abusers. But here is the counter-conventional truth that changes the entire paradigm. Unconditional love does not and should not mean unconditional access. Sometimes the absolute highest manifestation of family responsibility is the total withdrawal of support. When a familial ecosystem becomes toxic and parasitic, pouring more money, time, and emotional labor into it only fuels the toxicity. By shutting her wallet, locking her credit profile, and publicly exposing the police report for identity theft at a formal dinner, Jennifer did not destroy her family. The family was already destroyed by years of unchecked greed and deceit. She merely turned on the lights and forced them to look at the ruins. Refusing to protect capable adults from the natural consequences of their own reckless actions is not an act of cruelty. It is, in fact, the most profound, difficult, and genuine form of respect you can possibly offer them. It demands that they finally grow up. It forces them to interact with reality. As we navigate the complex, often heartbreaking terrain of our own familial obligations, we are ultimately forced to ask ourselves what it truly means to belong. Is a family just a biological pact that demands your financial and emotional martyrdom? Or should it be a reciprocal, honest ecosystem built on fairness, mutual elevation, and emotional intelligence? The devastating story of the stolen Hawaiian vacation and the secret inheritance asks us to closely examine the chairs pulled up to our own dining tables. When the laughter fades, the plates are cleared, and the lights are dimmed, you must look around and ask yourself, who is actually paying for the feast? Blood may write the introduction to your life's story, but it absolutely does not have the right to dictate your conclusion. The most terrifying and beautiful realization of adulthood is that you, and only you, hold the pen. If the table you are sitting at requires you to continuously carve away pieces of your own future just to pay for your seat, perhaps it is time to accept a shattering truth. You were never truly a guest at their table at all. You were the meal.